What is up guys, Broken Ronin here, and in this video I will be explaining and breaking down Projection Sorcery, one of, if not the most complicated curse techniques in the entire series of Jujutsu Kaisen. And if you guys are new to the channel or have been here before and just haven't subscribed yet, consider doing that and hitting the bell so you are notified to when I upload. In any case, let's jump right into the explanation. Tosha Juho, otherwise known as Projection Sorcery, is one of the most complex and misunderstood techniques amongst the Jujutsu Kaisen community, so I want to make sure that with this explanation video in particular, I break this technique down in the most palatable way possible. But first, let's just give what the definition is in the manga. Projection Sorcery is an inherited technique of the Zenin family. Naobito seems to be the progenitor of this technique, especially when considering how new it is in Jujutsu Kaisen terms, and this ability is passed on to his son, Naoya Zenin, as well. What Projection Sorcery does is essentially segment one segment into 24 different frames of movement. Users of this technique can plan out their movements using this ability, and so long as they don't defy the laws of physics excessively with their attacks, this technique grants them an insane boost in speed. Now, if you are like me or many other fans in the community, what I just said makes absolutely no sense, and that's completely fine. I'm going to break it down in more detail. So in order to help me make this click more with you guys, I have to very quickly and briefly explain a bit about animation. When things like anime or cartoons are animated, they are typically made at a frame rate of 24 frames per second. What this means is that within the span of 1 second of real time, animators will draw 24 different drawings or illustrations in sequence in order to create the illusion of movement. Technically, this is only true in certain instances, but for the sake of simplicity, just think of 24 FPS as 24 separate drawings, images, or movements per second. What Projection Sorcery does is give the user of this technique the properties of a animation. By activating this technique, Naobito and Naoya are able to plan out a predetermined set of movements to follow. Once that path is set, they follow that route within the span of 1 second in 24 separate, disjointed movements. With the activation of this technique come a few added benefits. The first one is that while the user of this technique is moving, anything touched by them must also abide by the 24 FPS rule. Failure to do so makes the target in question become frozen for 1 second, meaning that if Naobito is using his technique, touches you, and you don't start moving at the same frame rate as his technique demands, you'll be completely vulnerable to attacks for an entire second, which, when you move as fast as JJK characters do, 1 second of stillness is quite a bit of time. The second and much more impressive benefit is the speed boost that this technique gives you. In both Naobito and Naoya's usage of this technique, we see that they are some of the fastest characters in the entire verse, even making superhuman characters like Yuji look slow in comparison. Naobito was even able to become the second fastest sorcerer in the world due to this technique and possess speed surpassing a special grade curse on the level of Jogo. And Naoya's usage of this curse technique allowed him to completely blitz the likes of Yuji and Shoso, as well as make him enough of a threat for awakened Maki to take him seriously. A fighter, I must remind you, that should be relative to, if not completely even, with Toji Fushiguro himself. There is an upper limit on the amount of acceleration that Projection Sorcery can grant at any given time. However, if the technique is continuously used in succession, the user's speed is able to continually increase. So it makes quite a bit of sense for a sorcerer with this technique to not stop and repeatedly activate the technique for more and more speed. Now, this raises a rather important question about the technique. Why does this make Naoya and Naobito so fast? What is the logical reasoning for this extreme speed increase? Now, while this isn't really explained in hyper detail within the manga, the answer to this question, at least the answer that I've extrapolated, is rather simple conceptually. You see, Projection Sorcery allows for the user to make 24 movements per second. But a Projection Sorcery user's movements and a normal person's movements are completely different within this context. We know based off of Naobito's movements in the Dagon fight that when Projection Sorcery is being used, characters are able to sort of glitch around the battlefield rather than make fluid movements like normal people do. You see, Naobito is able to punch Dagon into the air, jump into the air, punch Dagon back down onto the ground, and before Dagon is able to regain his bearings, he's able to appear on the ground ready to throw another punch, right? Normal people cannot move in that fashion. Normal people cannot jump off of air and use it as a platform for extra speed movement. So we know that a projection sorcerer's movements, while they have to obey the laws of physics to some weird sort of vague degree, they are able to break or bend certain rules. Let's use an example to illustrate my point a little bit better and get it out of the nebulous conceptual realm. Let's say you are racing Naobito in a 100-meter dash. Once the race starts, you begin to take your first step. This first step of yours is movement. It takes dozens of these repeated steps or movements in order to get to the end of the track and cross a distance of 100 meters. For Naobito, however, he would simply be able to set a predetermined distance for his technique and set his first movement as a glitch towards the end of the track, meaning that the 24 FPS technique will always allow them to cover more distance in a shorter amount of time than a normal person, which gives them a boost in speed. So kind of just think of 24 FPS as it allowing the user to glitch around the battlefield at greater distances than normal people would be able to cover. This boost in speed can be increased by perpetually activating the technique, and this makes for a very powerful ability if used properly and efficiently in combat. Now, while this technique is very powerful and allows for the user of this ability to be almost unrivaled in speed, there are multiple drawbacks or restrictions on this ability. For one, the predetermined route that a user of this technique sets out must be followed. It simply cannot be adjusted at all. We see the consequences of this in full in Naoya's fight with Maki. Because she was able to counter his technique and abide by the 24 FPS rule herself, Naoya's plan of hitting her while mid-frame simply was no longer plausible and left him susceptible to having his skull caved in by Maki. On top of this, the movements predetermined by projection sorcery, like I mentioned earlier, cannot excessively break the laws of physics. If they do, the user of this ability becomes frozen as well. These drawbacks and restrictions can mostly be bypassed or mitigated if you have a natural sense of strategic timing and combat sense like Naobito did, and if you are able to anticipate your target's counterattack options before moving yourself, something that Naoya kind of prides himself on. Which means that while these drawbacks do exist, if you're intelligent or have a natural aptitude to using this technique, you will be able to sort of lower the chances of being able to be caught off guard by these things. We do see that injuries that vastly alter your physiology, like Naobito losing one of his arms, do affect your ability to abide by the rules of 24 FPS and do make it harder to follow this predetermined route effectively, which made him less efficient in speed and allowed him to be caught by Jogo's attack. But to very quickly and simply recap for any and all that are possibly and reasonably confused by the technique still, Naoya and Naobito make 24 separate movements per second upon technique activation. These movements can cover much larger distances than a normal person's movement. By doing this, their speed is boosted dramatically and allows for them to freeze people or things that don't move in accordance with the 24 movements per second rule. If Naobito or Naoya break the laws of physics excessively, they themselves will freeze. And with that being said, that is projection sorcery in a nutshell. I know many fans of this series have had real trouble with this technique and conceptualizing it, so I hope that this video was able to give you a much more palatable and digestible explanation of the ability and everything that it has to offer. If you did enjoy this video and learned something from it, consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you are notified to when I upload not just more explained videos, but Jujutsu Kaisen and anime manga content in general. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys next week where I drop yet another explained video.